Well, good afternoon, church. Happy Monday to you. I hope that you have had an excellent weekend. I hope that you enjoyed Daniel's worship time and his devotional thoughts. I hope you also enjoyed the surprise guest speaker and the quirkiness of our discussion. We're we're learning as we go, but I heard a lot of good feedback about it. And yeah, we're going to continue to keep experimenting and trying to find new creative ways to be the body together. And in some ways, God has given us kind of an open door to do a lot of new things. So we're going to continue to explore that, but I hope that it's been a beneficial weekend for you, and I hope that you are feeling full as you go into this new week in Monday. I'm going to be doing a little Monday morning extension, a little bit of something that I wanted to talk about a little bit, but it didn't really fit with the rest of the sermon. But just something that's really kind of cool and peculiar and hopefully very thought-provoking but helpful for you that I saw while I was doing my study out of John 9. So I talked about this last week with the woman at the well and her counterpart in John that she has, where she has Nicodemus as somebody that's supposed to be read against her story so that you can make comparisons and you can make contrasts, and not that he's her mirror image, but there's a lot of differences about them in the way that their story goes. But that's not the only time that this happens in the Gospel of John, and actually there are quite a few of these counterpart stories in the Gospel of John that John puts up against each other for us to read them and to naturally kind of compare them in our minds to get more of the message. And one of them is the blind man in John 9. He has a counterpart. He has another, there's another person that is healed by Jesus, and it is the lame man in John chapter 5 that kind of stands as a counterpart, as a foil, or as a comparative story for us to look at. And so, I mean, my first thing is to say, if you have some time for personal study, go look at those two stories. Go really read through John 9 and read through John 5 and hold them up against each other, because you're going to find that the language, there are pieces of the language that are very much the same. You're going to find that the plot of the story moves in a very similar way. But then you're also going to find that there's some significant differences that leads you to see that while the blind man is kind of a positive story, the lame man is kind of a negative story, even though both of them encounter miraculous healing, which I think is very interesting. I'm not going to go into all of that today, but I wanted to hit one specific point, and that is the question that Jesus asks both of them. There's a common feature where Jesus sees both of them, and then he goes and asks them a question. And the question that he asks of the blind man is what do you want? But the question that he asks the lame man is an even more interesting one, because again, it would seem to be a very obvious question that really kind of it puts us off. It brings us up short. But listen to this real quick in John chapter 5. Okay. So Jesus goes to Jerusalem. He's in Jerusalem, and he goes to this gate, the sheep gate, and there's a pool by there called Bethesda. Okay, and it's a big pool with 5 different kind of porticos, big open porches around it. Okay, in these lay a multitude of people who were sick and blind and lame and withered, and they were waiting for the movement of the waters. For traditionally it said that it was an angel of the Lord that went down at certain times into the pool and stirred up the water, and whoever was first after stirring the water stepped in was made well from whatever disease that they were afflicted with. Now there was a man who had been ill there for 38 years, and when Jesus saw him lying there, he knew he had already been in that condition for a long time. And so he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" Which again seems like a strange thing to ask, right? If you're at the pool and you've been lame for 38 years, and Jesus knows this because he's Jesus, you would figure that, yeah, I'm here because I want to get well. But like most of Jesus' questions, there are multiple ways to take this. There's there's a layer kind of on the surface, and then there's a layer underneath the surface, right? And we talked about this on Sunday, that as the story of the blind man progresses, the blind man realizes that what he really needs is not physical sight. What he needs is spiritual sight. And Jesus is more than willing to grant him physical sight, but Jesus is also offer him the opportunity to go deeper, to actually see his need for the one who gives true sight to the blind, not just the physical regeneration of your eyeballs. And the funny thing is this is the same kind of question. When he asked the blind man, "Do you want to get well?" There's different ways to take that question. There's a physical way to take that question, and then there's also a deeper spiritual way to take that question. And while you see the blind man progress deeper into that spiritual, I more than the healing, I need the healer, is kind of where the blind man goes with this. Where the lame man goes is he just stays up on the level of the physical healing. And so his story has a very different trajectory. And actually, even though it hits some of the same things, like he gets in trouble with the authorities, just like the blind man does, and they question him just like they do the blind man, the way he responds is very different. And then even the way Jesus responds to him is very different because of that, right? And what really got drawn out of that idea for me is, what question is Jesus really asking you right now in this time? As you're dealing with a major disruption in life, as you are dealing with possibly some major grief and some major loss in life, both of yourself and your circumstances in your life, but also just people that you love that you're worried about. I know for me, after having closed the border now, I worry about my family. I worry about my mom and my dad. I worry about my grandmother. I worry about them. I worry about my relatives. And if something starts to go wrong, like, am I able to help them or not? Or am I just stuck? There's questions like that, right? We have a lot of unknown, and we have a lot of things that we kind of worry about. And kind of like where Jesus asked the blind man, "What do you want?" and kind of like where Jesus asks the lame man, "Do you want to get well?" I think Jesus is asking us a question right now. What do you really want right now? And there is a way to take that question at just a kind of a surface level and say, well, I mean, Jesus, I'd kind of like to get back to life as normal. But then there's another way to take that question. And do I really want to get well? Well, what do I want to get well from? Do I want to get well in just that I want physical health and to not be afflicted with a virus, or, like to stay physically safe, or, or to recover my routines, recover my livelihood, to be financially well instead of like worrying about my finances. There's all these different answers that are kind of up here. And then there's this other answer where Jesus is saying, do you want to get well? What do you really want? And so I would encourage us to seek wellness, but to seek the wellness that comes from Christ Jesus. And don't get me wrong, it's not that Jesus isn't interested in our physical health or our physical well-being. But again, I think, like I said earlier, that the outcome of this is not merely the outcome of this pandemic in our time is not merely whether we get sick or not. It's, does this make us more like Jesus or not? And so asking ourselves, really, really being able to take time to reflect. And I think we've been given a really good gift that I want to just remind us about, which is that we've been given the gift of solitude in many ways. And maybe you're saying, Travis, I have not been given the gift of solitude. I am like locked up in my house with all of my kids and everything. Well, you have been given the gift of slowing down, and you have been given the gift of being limited in some areas, and you have been given the gift of a lot of things just stopping around you, of having to kind of take an intentional Sabbath. And so what you have also been given is the opportunity to have that solitude, that silence. You can find those quiet times a little bit easier, even if you're amongst people. Um, and I think about these gifts of solitude and silence, and how often they are, our society does not make them available to us. But right now, the way our society is angled is they are available to us. In fact, they're being encouraged. People are like, stay at home, don't go out, don't go, spend a ton of time doing this or that or running around. All your sporting events are canceled, all of your cultural events are canceled, all of your weekly plans are canceled. You're working from home. I mean, and don't get me wrong, you got to keep good boundaries with that. I understand that, but you've been given the opportunity to slow down and focus on what matters. And I was going to read this. This is from the book Devotional Class or Spiritual Classics by it's Renovare, and it is Richard Foster, the same guy that wrote Celebration of Discipline and all that. But it's a bunch of collected readings of people that are about the spiritual disciplines. And I'm reading from a guy named Paul Tournier, who's actually he's a very, very prominent figure in blending the fields of psychology and theology together, which a lot of times those things don't necessarily hold hands, but they should, because God's made us people with minds and people with souls and peoples with bodies, so they should kind of all work together. But he has some very interesting things to say about silence and about solitude and about waiting and listening, from the perspective of somebody who's a licensed counselor but also a deep theologian. Listen to this, okay? Listen to this. Modern people lack silence. They no longer lead their own lives. They are dragged along by events. It is a race against the clock. I think that what so many people come to me as a counselor for is just to find a quiet, peaceful person who knows how to listen and isn't thinking all the time about what they have to do next. If your life is chock full of stuff already, there won't be room for anything else. Even God can't get anything else in, so it becomes essential to cut something out. I'm putting that as simply as I can. This is why I practice meditation, and this is why I've done it for the last 50 years, to silently sit before God. Silence is extremely difficult. For me, above all, it is a waiting. I wait for God to stimulate my thoughts sufficiently to renew me, to make me creative instead of being what St. Paul calls a clinging cymbal. It's become a cornerstone of my life. It is an attempt at seeing people and their problems from God's point of view, insofar as that is possible. And then the author that interviewed him said, "What was your first experience of meditation?" And he said, "I was trying to listen to God for a whole hour and I heard nothing." I think that's refreshing. Others would have been put off. You weren't? No, actually, it began to test my mettle. Was I really not capable of doing something that simple? What had interested me was the idea of listening in to God. That goes beyond silence. Silence is no longer an end, but a means. The most precious thing of all is the possibility of being, through the words in my mind, or through my inborn unconscious faculties, the recipient of thoughts that come from God. See, what you've been given isn't an end, it's a means. It's a means to being equipped to hear more from God. You may think you're boxed in right now. You may think that you're limited right now, but actually, you are being given the opportunity, because things have been cut out of your chock full life right now. You've been given the opportunity to be a recipient of the thoughts that come from God. And so when he's asking you the question, what do you want? Do you really want your life to get back to normal the way it always was? Or do you want to find a new normal that has more of God's presence in it? So you don't have to go back to doing everything exactly the same way that you were doing it before all of this happened. Instead, what you might find is that you get to lay a new foundation, a better foundation, a foundation where you get to listen to God more because this sort of thing takes practice, right? It's not easy. And I listen to what he says at the end. One of the most important things is patience. If I can recount a personal experience, I tell you, once I almost gave up medicine in order to become an evangelist. The idea tempted me, but my wife was not in agreement. You can see it's not easy to be sure what is God's will. We spent months in great perplexity, and I was even in despair sometimes until I became convinced that I ought not to leave medicine, but instead to introduce into medicine the experiences that I had had as a Christian. And then suddenly it all became clear. It was not a compromise. It was a synthesis. That was what made it creative. It was not that the view of one or the other had triumphed, but a third way, a more productive one, had been found. I'm happy to speak of this because it illustrates both the importance of trying to let God guide us and the difficulties that it involves. Patience is vital. Generally, when God's will is made manifest, it's obvious and everyone recognizes it. Unfortunately, however, that is infrequent in our lives. One would like it to happen more often, but then that would make us arrogant instead of humble disciples. So be patient with yourself. Be patient with God. Be patient with others in this time. And be patient if you kind of feel yourself bucking against this time of feeling like you're in limbo, of time that you're in waiting. Waiting is an active thing. You can actively be waiting on the Lord. And so I pray patience over you this week. I pray God's life over you this week. I pray his blessing over you this week. And I ask for you to just to really find those times to seek solitude with him and listen to the questions that he's asking you. Listen when he says, things like, well, what do you want right now? What do you really want right now? Do you want to get better? Do you want to get well? What do you really want me to do for you in this time? So that you aren't snapping off quick answers, but that you're actually able to spend the time and explore the deeper realities of him, to where more than the healing, you find yourself wanting the healer. And more than the gifts that he might give you, you find yourself desiring the heart of the giver. So be blessed, and I love you all very much. Praying for you a lot. We're continuing to get prayer requests and to follow through with them. We're continuing to find ways to help one another in excellent ways. And one thing that I'm planning on doing that I'll be posting about separately is that on Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm planning on going live on our Facebook channel, which basically is a guided discussion where you're going to get a chance to spend some time with me. I'm going to take us through a small Bible study together, and then also just kind of a time to check in, answer questions, do whatever. But it's kind of a thing where I'll be live on the computer screen, and you can be typing in things, you can be reacting to things, you can be interacting with me as we go on the Facebook channel, and you'll see that. So be on the Shelburne Street Beyond Sunday group Wednesday at 10 o'clock, and then you'll see the live video interaction come up, and you just click on that. It'll go full screen, and you can be right in there in the discussion. So anyway, love you all, and I will talk to you on Wednesday. All right, bye.